Welcome to the University of Minnesota School of Nursing Creative Nursing launch of this most important issue on dismantling systems of white supremacy. I'm Barb Peterson, Director of Inclusivity, Diversity, and Equity for the School of Nursing, and I'm happy to host our time today. I'd like you to know that our program is being recorded, and we hope that there will be time in the end for a session for question and answers. So please put your questions as they arise in the Q&A, and we'll address them at the end of our time. I know you're eager to get on with the program, but first I'd like to share a little bit about our School of Nursing. The events of 2020 highlighted the long persistent injustices faced by Black and Indigenous people of color, inequity that's been carefully woven into the very fabric of healthcare and nursing and academia. Many schools of nursing in the United States have renewed their commitment to the courageous work of dismantling systemic racism in their schools and curriculum. The University of Minnesota School of Nursing is likewise on a courageous, transformational journey toward becoming more inclusive, equitable, and diverse. As a place dedicated to educating nurses and transforming the healthcare system, our school is committed to address injustice and create sustainable change. As the Director of Inclusivity, Diversity, and Equity, I recognized that leading a school toward anti-racism requires a combination of reflection, commitment, and action. Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator and philosopher best known for his text, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, said, reflection and action must never be taken independently. So we needed time to reflect. We needed time to learn about historical and systemic inequities and the space to unpack the complex baggage of white supremacy and privilege that persists. So then we know that while reflection is necessary, reflection without action is essentially the same as inaction. Without action, reflection without commitment and action can just become this passive, self-absorbed pastime that's not helpful in creating substantial and sustained change. So reflective and intentional planning coupled with committed action is needed. The leaders in our School of Nursing have committed to moving forward toward greater inclusivity, diversity, and equity through interrupting and dismantling practices that maintain systemic racism. The courageous and transformational journey is not a sprint, it's a marathon that requires long-term commitment. And at the center of this change is community, because commitment is ours to share. We're in it together. There's room for each person in the school to community to work towards equity and inclusion. We've got book clubs to policy writing, from looking at recruitment and supporting of our students to looking at search and selection and faculty development, from teaching anti-racism in our curriculum to highlighting anti-racism in our research. As this issue of the journal states, we're in it together. The School of Nursing is all of our work. We are in it together. So reflection coupled with commitment and action is leading to this transformational change in nursing education and healthcare. So I know you're eager to get on hearing from our authors, but with those introductory words, I'd first like to introduce you to my colleague and friend, Dr. Nasra Giama.
Thank you, Barb. My name is Nasra, as Barb said, and I'm the co-director for Inclusivity and Diversity and Equity at the School of Nursing here. I want us to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we are on before we start talking about the wonderful things that are in this new journal entry. So we acknowledge that the School of Nursing at the Twin Cities campus at the University of Minnesota was built with traditional homelands, within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. We recognize the long-standing relationship between the land and the Dakota people, the traditional stewards of this land. We also acknowledge the violence of colonialism and ongoing racism toward Indigenous people. We are growing in our realization that the healthcare system meant to protect and heal people has supported structures of racism, causing ongoing trauma and health inequities. So as part of the process to heal the land and the community, I want us all to reflect on these questions. What are our obligations to the people who first inhabited this land? How do we figure out what our responsibilities are to this land? How can we be good guests here? How can we support existing local struggles? How can we work together to promote the School of Nursing's vision to ensure optimal health and well-being for all people in the planet? By living here, working here, and using the resources of this place and in this moment, we now participate in this experience. I thank you all for taking time just to remember that we are guests on this land again. Moving us forward, I want to introduce Marty Lewis Huntsinger, who has a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from the University of Maryland School of Nursing, Walter Reed Extension, and a Master's of Arts in Communication Studies from the University of Minnesota, with an emphasis on organizational and small group communication and a supporting program in health in the workplace. She's a retired pediatric nurse and preceptor. She's the editor-in-chief of Creative Nursing and an editorial board member and copy editor of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies. She's also an affiliate faculty member at the University of Minnesota School of Nursing, our community. So welcome, Marty.
Thank you, Nasra. So welcome to our celebration of this issue of Creative Nursing. Thanks to the U of M School of Nursing for hosting, especially Barb Peterson, Nasra Giamma, Zoe Marquis Kelly, Steve Rudolph, and Tom Steffes for making this happen. The authors presenting today will describe for you their work and consider questions about it. I'd like to briefly describe for you the work of our editorial board and peer reviewers that went into this journal issue. Our authors held us accountable for learning a vocabulary that's new to many of us: whiteness, white advantage, white privilege, white fragility, anti-Black racism, racialization, racial disparities, allies, collaborators, co-conspirators, unconscious bias and systemic bias, microaggressions, tone policing, that was a new one for me, tone policing, calling out and calling in, and words we thought we knew used in new challenging ways: bodies, intentional, epigenetics, othering, trauma, epidermal, underrepresented, colorblindness. Here are some of the questions we grappled with. What is the difference between the aspirational "I treat everyone equally" and the dehumanizing "I don't see color"? Between active anti-racism of confronting dehumanizing behavior in the moment and the passive "I'm not a racist, I grew up near a reservation"? How do we make overt the covert environment that surrounds us all, of white as the default appearance, white history as the accurate history, and white values, whatever that is, as the only values that should guide us? How graphic can we get in calling out the dehumanizing actions of so many people, past and present? How completely can we stop blaming the victims of health disparities? And how strongly can we word the news that race is a social construct with no basis in the science that nurses love to claim? I want to acknowledge some of the people without whom this issue of the journal wouldn't be what it is. Here it is. It's wonderful. Our amazing editorial board members, past and present, some of whom are here today: Cyrus Bethaja, Bridget Carter, Terry Grainer, Barbara Green, Jen Guancy, Susan Lampe, Heidi Orsted, Mary Colorutis, Marie Manthe, Teddie Potter, Larry Savette, Tammy Sinkfield-Morey, Rebecca Smith, Lorraine Stiefel, Lori Steffen, Chris Suby, and Dory Taylor Sullivan. Our creative healthcare management company is the healthcare consulting company that sponsors the journal. Besides Marie Manthe and Mary Colorutis, I know that Kathy Perzo, Chris Bjork, and Donna Wright are registered today, and others may have joined as well. We have champions past and present at Springer Publishing: Diana Osborne, Megan Larkin, Corin Thomas, Matt Zimmerman, Adam Etkin, Jim Costello, and Beth Berry. 5 articles in this issue were discussed at our launch event on Tuesday, hosted by Duke University, and some of those authors are here today. Those articles are Entrenched White Supremacy in Nursing Education Administrative Structures by Bridget Carter and Ramey Alexander, Recruiting Underrepresented Students for Nursing Schools by Vernell DeWitty and David Bird, White Supremacy and Rooting Out Racism in Nursing Education by Amy Koch, Revolutionizing the Nursing Curriculum by Bridget Carter and Beth Phillips, and Uprooting Racism, the Role of Nurses in Cultivating Improved Maternal Outcomes for Black and African American Women. And that is by Jacqueline McMillan Bowler and Angela Richard Eaglin. There are 2 documents that will help you dive deeper into this issue of the journal. There's an annotated table of contents that summarizes each article, and there's a free download of one of the articles, Understanding Racism as a Historical Trauma That Remains Today, Implications for the Nursing Profession by Roberta Waite and Deena Nardi, that's being discussed today. Links to both of these documents will be on the Creative Healthcare Management website. It's just chcm.com, Creative Healthcare Management, chcm.com, along with the individual authors' emails and the post-production recording of this event. Now I'd like to introduce Connie White Delaney. She's professor and dean of the University of Minnesota School of Nursing. She holds a BSN in Nursing and Mathematics, an MA in Nursing, and a PhD in Educational Administration and Computer Applications. She's completed graduate study in Integrative Health and Healing and postdoctoral study in Nursing and Medical Informatics. She's an active researcher in data and IT standards for nursing, healthcare, and interprofessional practice and education, big data science, and integrative informatics. Connie?
Thank you, Marty. In it together. Dismantling systems of white supremacy. On behalf of our School of Nursing faculty, staff, all of our students, our friends, supporters, and alumni, we congratulate Creative Nursing, CHCM, Springer, your leadership, Marty, and all those that you acknowledged. We celebrate your courage. Tammy, Teddie, Roberta, Deena, Amy, Jim, Rebecca, Erika, Pandora, Nick. You represent the power of I am and we are. A thank you to each one of you as authors and the others that Marty mentioned for your courage to have voice that persists and begs action. And the we part, Creative Nursing, Springer, CHCM, the School of Nursing, all of the associations, organizations, and communities that we're representing, represent the power of relationship and community. Individual courage is a start. Without the marriage to community, the we do not have impact for bold social change. Barb mentioned the commitment of our school. We are in it together with you. And when I say that, it represents the courage of our school, individually and as the we, to partner with you. It represents something else. We cry, we commit, we have compassion, and we are committed to the change. So we're committed to celebrating, and I mean that, celebrating the courage of lifting up what we all need to know, welcome, but most significantly, create change. I have the delightful honor to introduce Marie Mackey. Marie is a colleague, she's an alum, she's a friend, and she's a wisdom worker. Marie, as we know, is the developer of primary nursing model of care delivery. She's the founder of Creative Healthcare Management. Marie holds a Master's of Nursing Administration and an honorary doctorate, both from the University of Minnesota. She not only is a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing, she's also been designated by the American Academy of Nursing as a living legend. Most relevant to today is she's the author of the recently published scholarly article, A History of Systemic Racism at the University of Minnesota School of Nursing. And I want to insert, Marie, thank you. And our school owns our racism and commits to our deep change. Marie is the founding editor of Creative Healthcare Management. Join me in welcoming Marie and celebrating this moment of wisdom sharing.
Thank you very much, Connie. Dismantling White Supremacy is a very provocative title for a provocative journal. I had always hoped that creative nursing would grow into the strength it's showing today. This journal started a long time ago and step by step has evolved into a highly respected, peer-reviewed professional journal. We moved beyond strictly professional articles into the realm of social justice several years ago. We began to publish articles on topics considered hot button issues to the importance of the health of society. First, individual issues began showing up and we began to publish them. And then to include more specifically entire journals on social justice topics. Along the way, the history of systemic racism in the School of Nursing, another on caring for LGBTQ individuals, focusing on the moral ethics of caring for people anywhere on the gender spectrum and the color spectrum. So that has been one of our primary issues. The journal we're launching today is the result of extraordinary combination, as Connie has said, of creativity and courage. The editorial board, led by Marty Lewis Hunsinger's extraordinary capacity for ethical leadership. I just want to say that never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that we would be producing a whole issue dealing with dismantling white supremacy. The courage and willingness to step forward and lead the profession in a direction that I think is extremely important. When I look at nursing theory, when I look at the fundamental values of our legacy leaders and the contemporary wisdom and the practice of nursing today, I see the capacity for this profession to exert extraordinary leadership in helping society as a whole eliminate the barriers to equity that prevent us from treating each other and every human being as deserving as every other human being. Nursing's code of ethics, the historical value of those legacy leaders, and the current demonstration of nursing bravery throughout the episodes of COVID-19 are the issues that give credibility to society, to leading society in dismantling structural and systemic racism. This is our job to advance diversity, equity, and inclusivity in our realm, demonstrating to others outside of our realm how they can also dismantle that which society, often unconsciously, designed as a way to separate people of color. Nursing has the capacity, the opportunity, and the credibility to dismantle white supremacy in our realm. You know, like Martin Luther King, I too have a dream. Nursing goes first and shows the rest of the world how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie, for those wise words, and thank you for Connie for that warm welcome as well. We're now moving into the time when our authors who are here are presenting their articles, and we're beginning with Tammy Sinkfield-Morey and Teddie Potter. Their article is Sharing Our Stories and Holding the Past to Task.
Good afternoon to all of you, and I am so happy that all of you are here. I need to first say, I am so completely hopeful. 24 years ago, when I started my practice in nursing, I stood alone. I was alone when I was accosted at the bedside by racism, though I was with very loving peers, all who were white, none who understood this journey, that hatred and that admonishment of who I am as a being. But today we all stand here in it together, and I could not be more proud or more hopeful. As we begin to share a little bit about our article, I would be completely remiss if I did not first begin by sharing my heartfelt gratitude for Teddie Potter, who shares the same love of stories, knowing the power of the transformation they have, and who graciously entered into this with me to hold that sacred space we held so that we could share our stories as a vehicle to know one another more deeply, more lovingly, and more honestly, so that we could find a better way by which we could share with you a way to shatter the burdens, the trauma, the abhorrent ways of racism upon Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, and upon all of us people as a people. We entered into our conversation with only a few intentions, and those intentions were to know, to hold, and to grow. We didn't enter into it with the intention of this article, but we have been blessed with the gift of this article to be represented in a completely unprecedented issue that deals with dismantling racism, and I could not be any more proud. So before I start talking about how the power of story in our lives prepared us for this, I want to say thank you to all of you who contributed and made this so real, so active, and so loving, and a way for us to all move forward. Stories are a way that we share our being, our existence, and that we move into a loving relationship. We were able to use our connection over 10 hours of sharing stories as a way that begot authentic intentions for healing and for understanding. This is a gift that her and I have shared, and we are able to share with you. It sets a template now for us to hold deliberate and nurturing spaces by which these conversations to denudate and disrupt the structures that hold racist ways in place can begin. The stories that Teddie and I share are a reflection of the nuances of our human experiences that brought us closer together and shared dignity and empowerment. That is what that sacred space of sharing stories did for us. Our respect and our belief in the power of storying propelled us to be lovers of storying in different ways. Teddie's work on storying, magnified through the use of the public narrative for the development of the story of self, has had a powerful outcome for users to advance their ways of knowing with both heart and with head. For me, storying became real and active in my life through my doctoral project at Augsburg College, where my work focused on the use of story in nurse-patient engagement. That project was called Story Care, and it had had incredible implications in the way we engage with our patients, with equity in patient outcomes, and with satisfaction scores during that trial. Even today, when we just think about how stories are impacting us as we go through COVID. Many of the patients that we are seeing alone, dying without family at their side, the power of their story is what is going to help that practitioner near their side, aid them in that transformation to another life. As we engage and start moving forward with ways of dismantling systems of racism, I hope you utilize the power of story and understand the intention of it, to move our hearts, our minds, and our bodies forward, that we love and we engage and we hold each other. Eddie?
Thank you. It was such a rich part of my life to share stories with Tammy, and I will always remember those moments. And COVID forced it to be over Zoom, so it shows that you don't have to be having a cup of coffee or tea together. It is possible over distances to have these relationships. And what I think we need to do is shift our language. We talk about structural racism, but that makes it sound like it's almost an infrastructure that's external to us. And not until you say structures and stories of racism do you begin to hear, how does this impact the people around me? And how do I, as an individual, participate in keeping this in place? Otherwise, it's too big, it's too easy to dismiss and to say, I'm not part of the problem. And as a white person, it's really important to be willing to hear the stories and recognize the pain that this system causes, and to recognize that we don't want to be part of that. How do we dismantle? How do we participate in taking it apart? In all the different spheres of influence we have, what can we do? So our article was really a leaning in, hearing the stories of each other. How did we both learn about race? How did we both experience this? How were we taught these structures by our family? How did these structures impact us or shape us and create us to be the people we are today? Because we shared our stories, I can say personally, I'm a different person because we shared these stories. And so it frees us up. Otherwise, we use a lot of energy keeping these stories buried, hidden, either in pain because we've experienced it, or in shame because we've been part of causing it. And all that energy that's used to keep it hidden inside, once you tell your story, once it's out there, you can use that energy for transforming and dismantling these structures we talk about. So that's what Tammy and I are calling all of us to be part of. Thank you, Tammy.
Some of those ways that we talked about as initial steps that we can take in utilizing the power of story to transforming us as humans, as beings, as loving one another in more genuine and authentic ways, begins with the first step of knowing yourself and knowing your own story. There are several opportunities that in assessments, models, and evaluations that you can begin journaling. But one thing I think I most rely on, and Kaya, if you're there, this is a nod to you, is the use of Harvard implicit bias test. I think finding these assessment tools, using them in collective groups or individually, to start identifying where you lie along certain plateaus or certain ideologies. You know, for example, with the Harvard implicit bias test, there's a series of 18 different categories that you can use to evaluate your affinity for a certain characteristic or another. I know I use it quite frequently as a mechanism to judge where I am based on experiences. There's the IDI, there's many applications, 21-day challenges that allow people to reflect upon their own stories, by which knowledge of that story you can begin to share with others. You really can't appreciate the power of the story in another without first knowing yours, and then be willing to share those stories in appreciative ways for your own personal growth. I know my own revelation of the power of story came at the bedside when someone had felt about me, a thought that was their own with no regards for who I was. And rather than be reduced to what that person felt I was, I saw in that person that their story needed to be lifted too, in order to appreciate a journey that we could travel on together. So again, there's other cultural intelligence and cultural quotient development assessments you can do, but in doing so, you have to know your story, be able to share it first.
Well, and if I can just jump in here, I could listen to Tammy all day, and part of my job is to have to keep track of the time here. I want to just point out that this article had many or several titles before it became called Sharing Our Stories and Holding Our Past to Task. That was an organic process. That's how this article came to be. So I'm going to
say the steps just to move forward from our article: increase personal awareness, know who you are, acknowledge that we as healthcare providers are not immune to racism, bias, prejudice, or stereotyping. Look for those opportunities to advance equity in the systems level, in your policies, practices, mission, vision statements, funding, and community agendas. Look at your boards in your organizations. What are those boards? What do they look like? What are they saying to you? Are they white? Are they diverse? An example in policies is bereavement policies. What do they look like? Or do they reflect everybody? Identify your biases and your inequities while creating methodologies and interventions. Be intentional. You have to be intentional as you're approaching these ways to eliminate systems of inequity, and be merciful. Be merciful with yourself. Be merciful with those that you are engaging with, and know that narratives are transformational. I'm sorry, Marty, but I had to get that in.
Oh no, that is wonderful. What I'm going to say to everyone now is that we already know that we will not have time then for a Q&A at the end. So what I'm going to encourage everybody to do, put your questions in the Q&A and we will record them all, but we also are going to publish the emails of all of these authors. Reach out to them personally yourself and ask your questions. The next article is the one that is a free download, and that link will be available in various places. It's by Roberta Waite and Deena Nardi, Understanding Racism as a Historical Trauma That Remains Today, Implications for the Nursing Profession.
Thank you. We want to first thank Bridget for the invitation to contribute to this magnificent work that's being published by Creative Nursing. And the article that Dr. Nardi and I wrote really focuses on addressing racism as a historical trauma that continues to persist today. And we have endured over 500 years of historical trauma, 400 of which was enslavement, and another 100 years of Jim Crow laws in the South, which went relatively unchallenged until the civil rights era of the 60s and 70s. But with the pervasive nature of racism, the nursing profession is not exempt from contributing to its perpetuation. However, the conundrum for nursing is that we speak to having a desire to help people. Our codes of ethics identify social justice as a core nursing value, and we declare that we want to promote health equity. But in general, nurses often lack critical knowledge about racism, which must be uprooted or dismantled to assure these things to occur. So in order to advance meaningful discussion, Dr. Nardi and I did define a lot of the key terms, and we provided a brief background on these key terms in our article. Some of these terms were mentioned by Marty earlier: whiteness, white supremacy, racialization, anti-Black racism, white privilege, and historical trauma. And we place great emphasis on the need for nurses to understand the influence of racism as an historical trauma, given its rootedness in white supremacy culture. Also recognizing that our profession has struggled to promote diversity, which is a key goal of ours stated as well. We underscore the need for nurses to understand their role in sustaining oppressive practices and structures via colorblind practices, which was mentioned earlier, of not seeing race, along with thinking one can remain neutral when met with social and political platforms that fuel these inequities. So nurses are complicit with perpetuating racism. And Dr. Nardi is going to speak to actions that can be taken if we really want to create genuine change, if that is truly desired. Dr. Nardi?
Thank you, Dr. Waite. And those actions were mentioned already by Tammy and Teddie, many of them, but they have many dimensions, certainly many places that they can be done. Sustained intentional actions too, they're needed to sharpen our awareness of racism in our systems and our day-to-day lives, starting with some critical self-reflection and self-critique. To better understand our imposed racial identity and how we can describe the cycle of racism that persists from generation to generation, and then update what we know with some intentional reading about racism and anti-racism. There's a plethora of valid, evidenced anti-racism resources out there that can be assessed and used in anti-racism work. Just an example of how to access them. You can Google anti-racism resources, and you will have again a number of anti-racism resources that can be downloaded and used in a number of ways by faculty, administration, nurses in practice, nursing students. Understanding anti-racism terms such as Black Lives Matter, microaggressions, white fragility. Roberta, you've already named them, why they're used. Otherwise, we end up bickering and arguing over them instead of using them, wasting our valuable time and energy and focus. We can change society through intentional actions. If you're labeled white, start with becoming an ally. In solidarity. An ally is someone who's willing to commit to righting a wrong, in this case, to end white privilege and racism, especially anti-Black racism. If you're labeled white, then use white privilege to end white privilege by noticing, I think, Teddie, you mentioned it before, if historically marginalized people are equitably represented in faculty or executive positions or administrative positions, law enforcement, teaching, social services, in your places of work, in your neighborhoods, your clubs, then say something, do something with this privilege and make it work to end itself. Make the segregated integrated. When you vote for the many qualified candidates who represent diverse populations in the United States, when you nominate for scholarships, or leadership positions or administration, or welcome someone in business or work, or something that I think is so important, when you mentor. When you agree to mentor, it is a commitment and it should be sustained, where you can do some genuine mentorship, getting to know the aims, the goals, the strengths of your mentee, and then sticking with that mentorship role over time until your mentee has reached their goals. Then there is that, and welcoming someone to, again, business and work. Be a part of the continued movement to end this culture of racism that's still entrenched in our society. Then speak for yourself, not for others, for yourself and your part in ending racism and the idea of race once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nardi and Dr. Waite. And I want you to know, Springer Publishing did give us one free download, and our two co-guest editors, generous scholars that they are, did not choose their own articles. The one they chose is the one that they felt had this broad foundational information about what to do next. So I just want everybody to know that. The next article is by Amy Harding, and she's in her car. Are you, hello, are you there?
Can you hear me okay, Marty?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. So hi, my name is Amy Harding, and I just want to thank briefly everybody for being present here together today, and thank Dean Delaney, the University of Minnesota faculty and staff, and the Creative Nursing Journal leaders for creating this space for us to discuss our work. So for me, this article reflects my perspective about white supremacy and racism within nursing education. As the community around me was stricken and demolished from pain and inequities resulting from systemic racism following George Floyd's murder, I was forced to look in the mirror to understand how I contributed to the pain, suffering, and destruction all around me. Through the realizations and acknowledgement of my own privileges, I began to examine what those privileges afforded me and how those privileges, unexamined, blinded me to the experiences of my Black and Brown friends, family, and students. This examination of privilege led me to explore whiteness and the cultural and social norms that are expected within our systems and often not questioned, as people with white skin more frequently make the rules from a place of privilege and a perspective of whiteness. In nursing programs throughout the US, faculty and administration are majority white, which unsurprisingly is the lens through which policies, procedures, and cultural norms are developed. And this perpetuates our system that, left unexamined, can lead to the oppression of our students of color and builds those invisible barriers, barring many from realizing success. So the reflection I wrote was also a call to action to nurses, faculty, and administration to acknowledge how imperative it is to critically analyze our teaching materials, textbooks, and articles for racist and oppressive content and address that within our programs, remove it, rebuke it. I ask that we also examine and evaluate the built systems within our programs to better understand the inherent white supremacy that is embedded within them and assess and mitigate the resultant damage and harm that is being done to our students of color and to the future of our profession overall. I now also ask that we act in peace, kindness, and compassion with each other as we all participate in the difficult work of dismantling white supremacy in nursing and nursing education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was wonderful. Yes. And our next article is by James Burrows. It's Dismantling Systems of White Supremacy and Systemic Racism at Children's Minnesota. James?
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, first of all, thank Tammy and Rebecca for not necessarily forcing me, but forcing me to get this article done. I keep a busy schedule and I kept saying, I don't have time, I don't have time. I thought they would leave me alone. They never did. So thank you for allowing me to be in this great publication. I'm gonna hit this quickly, 7 things real quickly. In my article, first you gotta acknowledge it. At Children's, we wanna be every family's essential partner. And you can't be every family's essential partner if you have families of color not being served well, having negative health outcomes, making sure that families don't wanna entrust the healthcare system. You have to acknowledge that. And one of the things at Children's we do is acknowledge that. The next thing is you have to invest in it. My office exists in only one hospital in Minnesota. There's only one Chief Equity Inclusion Officer who's now a Vice President as well, reporting to the CEO, and that's at Children's Minnesota. Other hospital systems don't invest in it, they bury it, and they don't talk about it enough as far as health equity and the importance of having this role. You wouldn't have a hospital without a chief medical officer. You wouldn't have a hospital without a COO. You probably wouldn't have one without a CFO as well. You shouldn't have one without a chief equity officer to make sure your patients and families are well taken care of in an equitable way. Third thing is name it. We have to name white supremacy. You have to name systemic racism. You have to name it, name it, name it. A lot of times, there's nothing wrong with talking about implicit bias. There's nothing wrong with talking about things that are not done well that aren't racism. But if you let you name systemic racism, you won't be able to change it. And then when you create solutions, they won't be tailored towards it. The next thing is measure it. You have to measure. What measured gets done. I talk about that, and we measure hiring. We have a hiring goal of 34% people of color every year. We have an attrition goal. We're trying to reduce the attrition rate for people of color by 3.4%. We have supplier diversity goals for spending money in underserved communities. Those are communities of color with women-owned businesses. We also have goals about reducing disparities from our Black patients and our white patients with well-controlled asthma, combo vaccines, and others as well. You have to measure to get better. The next thing is do it. You have to do it. You have to say, okay, you know what, James, when you got here, there were no Black people on the senior leadership team at all. Now there are 4 of us, and 1 starting real soon as our chief nursing officer in a couple of weeks. You have to acknowledge the fact that my position was in itself buried as a chief medical officer, reported to in the chief advocacy officer. My CEO said, no, your position is important enough to be at the entire system level. I will report to him. You also have to do it through creating internships. We have an equity internship program where we're going to have 9 young ladies and young men, all mostly students of color, who are basically going to come into our system and get opportunities to become a nurse, become a doctor, become someone in the medical profession as well. You also have to do it in community too. We partner with the African American Leadership Forum. We partner with Latino Lead. We partner with the Coalition of Asian American Leaders and the Taway Foundation to say we're going to do it differently in community and be present in community, not through a children's lens, but through a community lens. The last 2, you got to evaluate it. You got to evaluate what you're doing. Medical systems are great for evaluating things, but not necessarily doing and putting actions to it. You can evaluate the mess out of something, but then you have to put your actions to it. And then the last thing is, if you evaluate it and it didn't work, or it did work, if it didn't work, do it again and try something new. If it did work, do it bigger and better. I had the pleasure, like I said, telling children's story. It is a story that we're still growing with. We want to be a leader in equity and inclusion in our healthcare system in Minnesota. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, James. I worked at Children's for 39 years, and I retired not because I was all done, just I had other things going on. James contributed to the title of my editorial. My editorial on this issue is called "Calling It What It Is, the Language of Equality." And that "calling it what it is" came directly from James's article. So thank you so much, James. Our next article is by Rebecca Smith, "Moving from Allyship to Antiracism."
I did not realize I was going to be asked to speak. So I didn't prepare a thing. Anyway, Tammy asked me to write an article on allyship. And already at that time, I think something that is something that we've probably all experienced, having spoken or thought on this subject for any length of time, is that words change and sort of just come in and out of vogue. And as I was starting this, there was already some sort of kickback on the notion of allyship, mostly in that it's just not enough, and that one of the things I say in the article is that it's a label I can then claim and then say, okay, I'm an ally and my work here is done. And so the notion of moving into an anti-racism journey, which is a never-ending thing, is what came up instead. And so we sort of leave the notion of allyship quickly and move into an anti-racist journey. It is an article written by a white person for white people. Everybody's welcome to read it. And it is just me talking to my white friends about what we're doing wrong and how to kind of see things in a way that we haven't seen them before. And I think one of the most important things in it, something that I have focused on a lot in the last couple of years, is the notion of trauma. And the idea that if I'm in a tense situation and my trauma kicks up, that is not an excuse for me to shut down or cease to be a good ally or a good anti-racist. It is a thing for me to just put on the back burner and do the right thing anyway. And people get hurt in this conversation, and people are always going to get hurt in this conversation. And white people are going to feel like they are bad people in this conversation sometimes. And we need to get to be comfortable with that. You're comfortable with being uncomfortable, and at least stay in the conversation and be grown-ups about this. And
Yes.
that's what my article sort of ends with, is a sort of a call to grow up, equating the notion of being a non-racist with being a grown-up, and also being able to figure out how to put your trauma on the back burner, go back to it, work on it, but put your trauma on the back burner, grow up, be a grown-up, and move forward with the discussion as it's happening. And I so much appreciate the opportunity to write that piece. It was really hard and really scary, and then it wasn't really hard or really scary, and it ended up being a wonderful experience. Thank you.
And I'm going to tell you a quote from her article before we move on. She said, if the truth is that the fates of all humans are inexorably intertwined, then the supposed supremacy of any person or group is a lie. In the case of white supremacy, it's a lie on which our entire American system is based. So that's what she says. All right, then Dr. Pandora Goode's article is called Historical Theoretical Perspectives to Consider in the Application of Community-Based Interventions for African Americans and Communities of Color. Dr. Goode?
Thank you, thank you. Good evening, colleagues, and thank you for having me at this event. And I'm going to give you some of your time back. So the primary care that people of color receive in their communities is often informed by commonly used theoretical models, such as the health belief model, the theory of planned behavior, and Pandora self-efficacy theories, whose relevance to the populations being served may be unclear. So understanding historical and theoretical perspectives and assessing their appropriateness for an intervention are important to understanding how the knowledge generated by the theories is to be applied. Community-based interventions guided by historical theoretical models that are still in use today continue to be necessary in the African American community and communities of color to determine the best way to educate the population about health and wellness, diseases, and disease self-management. Thank you.
That was great. And I really encourage everyone to read this article because these theories are ones that we see all the time and they are being applied in these communities. So we need to understand these theories and understand whether they're still working for us or not. So thank you so much, Dr. Goode. Thanks for joining us. And then Nick Tangen reviewed a book. It's a book that's quite well known, Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World and Become a Good Ancestor by Layla Saad. Nick, can you tell us a little about your review?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to Marty and for Creative Nursing Journal for this opportunity and for writing this really great article, or this really great, putting together this great journal. So I had the privilege of reading and engaging with Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy. And Saad's book started as a 28-day Instagram campaign that was calling on white and white-passing folks to engage in some personal and spiritual reflection on their own participation in the complex network of behaviors and actions that contribute to the structure of white supremacy. And so in her book, the reader's guided through daily reflections and teachings on topics, some of which have already been mentioned, like tone policing, white apathy, anti-Blackness, and then challenged to think about where and how these elements show up in their own action and in their own thinking, with some really good concrete reflective questions, which is really helpful. So this is a book that really calls individuals to do the work of decolonization in their own lives and in their own minds, and in their own beings. And I really read, I work professionally in the church, so I really read what Saad wrote as a deeply spiritual challenge, and one that I think is a really great tool in a large anti-racist toolkit. I do think that Saad's work sometimes borders on what might be called anti-racist self-help, which in my opinion can be specific, especially when it's a singular resource, can be another way for white and white passing folks to hide from some of the larger considerations of white supremacy culture. There's still this really big belief, I think, especially in white culture, that right ideas or right hearts will lead to right action. And I think throughout history, we've seen that that's not true. And so if our anti-racist engagement stays only at the personal level, believing that, if I just get my heart right, then the structures of racism will just fall off, then I think we're stuck where we are. I tend to work with a lot of white progressives, and that's where we like to sit some days. So I think Layla Saad's book is a great addition to a large toolkit for folks doing anti-racism work. I would add to it work that calls us to that bigger policy and political action and thinking about how we think about those structures. But again, a great resource, great help, incredibly challenging, but really important work to do. So pick it up, check it out, and add it to your toolkit. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nick. Well, I tell you what, according to my computer, we have 6 minutes left, and we have one more author who isn't able to be here, and I'm going to stand in for her, and I'm going to give her her full 4 minutes. All right, so here we go. This last article is by Erika Samman, and it's called The Origins of Incivility in Nursing, How Reconstruction-Era Policies and Organizations Impacted Social Behavior Within the Nursing Profession. Erika has a PhD in nursing from the University of Texas at Tyler. She's currently a medical writer with research interests in social science, population health, and disease management. She lives in Dallas, and her home was strongly affected by the recent weather calamities. They couldn't even go in their house for 4 days. So she's not able to be here. So I'm going to do my best to tell you about her article. Please contact her directly with your questions. She traces the origins of uncivil social behavior in the nursing profession to post-Civil War policies, including the Black codes that were a backlash against the Reconstruction Act that established the Freedmen's Bureau, and organizations, including the military and the Red Cross, that shaped the developing profession. Remember, in England, Florence Nightingale at this time, after the Civil War era, was shaping the nursing profession not in opposition to, but independent of the military structures that she dealt with during the Crimean War. But in this country, in those same years, nursing as a discipline was developing within the hierarchical structures of the military, reinforced by the Red Cross. I'm an Army nurse veteran. I want you to know I am not anti-military. I want to put that out there too. The chain of command in military hospitals had social implications for women and men that created class and racial tensions. Though the Surgeon General's office made surgeons' responsibilities a matter of policy, it was not as clear about the lateral obligations of subordinate employees, such as nurses or laundresses. The absence of policy defining the hierarchical standing of workers created a power vacuum that allowed white people to exert dominance over Blacks. Just as white men had military dominion over women, white women modeled their superiority by overseeing the work of Black women. The knowledge required to assume this new role was limited by race, while the opportunity to work in a self-supporting occupation outside domestic service naturally attracted educated Black women. Most of the nursing schools that came into existence after the 1870s excluded them, including, I might add, the University of Minnesota School of Nursing, as Marie and Connie alluded to, de jure as recently as the 1930s and de facto much later. And I would like you to know that in the case of a particular family that was impacted by it, Connie Waite Delaney has publicly apologized to that family for the way that their family member was treated. And there's a lot going on to make that right. Even more, as institutions that shaped racial interactions, military hospitals played a key role in advancing and reproducing the hierarchies of privilege and subjugation that were invisible to the whites who made them. When Erika emailed me letting me know she wouldn't be able to be here today and asking me to stand in, here's what she said. In a nutshell, my goal for the article was simply to connect how our history as a nation, the Reconstruction-era policies and organizational structures played a key role in the onset of incivility in nursing. And my own personal take, just me, Marty, about her article is that it supports what a lot of our authors have been saying in this issue. This kind of dehumanizing better than behavior isn't just a failure by a few people who were behind the door when manners were passed out. This behavior originates in and is reinforced by the hierarchical supremacist structures that birthed it. So I'm now going to hand the Zoom power back to Barbara and Nasra to do whatever you'd like with the time that's left.
So we have about 2 minutes left. And I'm not seeing questions in the question and answer box. So I will conclude us. Again, thank you everyone on behalf of the School of Nursing, Creative Nursing, and our sponsors. This hour has been spectacular. It's really gone by faster than I expected. We've benefited tremendously from the work of our authors and their ability to call out the insidious role of white supremacy and systemic racism and what it has on our society. I hope you're all able to take time to reflect on what you heard today, how it can shape your work and how you can be part of a transformation to a more equitable world. If we did not get to your questions today, we encourage you to reach out to the authors directly. The recording from this event will be posted on the University of Minnesota School of Nursing, Inclusivity, Diversity, and Equity website, as well as on YouTube and on the Creative website as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a blessed Friday and weekend.